Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to my channel. I hate rock music. And on top of all the rock music I love, I also love jazz. And one of the interesting developments for me in jazz was when Miles Davis created electric jazz. And then within a year or two, we had a whole bunch of rock jazz hybrid bands and what became jazz rock fusion at the time. And of course, a lot of those were people that were alumni from Miles Davis's band, notably John McLaughlin, the Mahavishnu Orchestra. But when you start snooping around, you find out that Columbia Records, specifically, and a lot of labels, started signing up new, interesting electric jazz rock hybrid bands. A notable one is Contraband, Space and Time album, 1971. Really interesting record on Columbia Records. Columbia also signed a jazz rock band called Compost. And then, of course, we had Return to Forever, the 11th House, just a astonishing number of electric jazz rock bands popped up after Miles Davis created the form. And then, as the years have gone on, a lot of bands have really redefined what jazz rock means, which means a lot of jazz players playing music that's more rock oriented. And over the last 10 or 20 years, we've seen an explosion of really cool bands that are jazz bands who play rock and have ferocious guitar players and play in trios and the like. And I find that a really great subgenre, and I love that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of adventurous rock listeners will appreciate a lot of these bands. Um, and so I'm going to do a series on jazz power trios using the guitar, drums, bass format and creating something that's part rock and part jazz. And one of the components of it that's interesting as well is that if a lot of these bands just added a singer and did jazz rock, they would be formidable rock bands, needless to say. A good example of that is Tempest, formed by drummer John Heisman. He was in a rock band with a lot of jazz influence called Coliseum. And then he formed a rock band called Tempest with Alan Holdsworth, a noted jazz guitar player and rock guitar player. And they did a lot of jazz inflected rock music and got a singer who could keep up with that kind of material and created a really interesting hybrid. Pato is another group like that, where they were a rock band with guitar, bass, drums, and a vocalist, and yet they did a lot of really outstanding excursions into actual jazz. And so the blueprint is there. It just depends on how adventurous the musicians are. So I'm going to start off this series. I think I'm going to do about 6 videos about jazz bands who would probably be bands that rock fans would really enjoy. And so I'm going to start with Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman is an all-black power trio that is really outstanding. They've been active for the better part of 30 years now. They started in 1998 and consist of Brandon Ross on guitar, Melvin Gibbs on bass, and J.T. Lewis on drums. Of course, Melvin Gibbs also participated in another great jazz band that rock fans could enjoy, Bill Frisell's Power Trio, um, um, the Power Tools. And so we also see a lot of crossover. A lot of the same musicians keep popping up in different configurations in a lot of these bands. So Harriet Tubman, I first came across Brandon Ross back in 1980. He was in a free jazz trio called the New Life Trio. Issued one album on a small label, and that was one of the earlier excursions I've heard of jazz with a guitar player in a trio setting. A lot more low key than what he ended up doing later. And so the last 20 or 30 years or so, he definitely came back out of obscurity and launched into full electric work. And he's an astonishing guitar player. The range of sounds he gets out of his guitar and his imagination is really unbelievable. And so they've been pretty busy. In 1998, they released an album called I'm a Man. And then in 2000, they released another album called Prototype. And then in 2011, they released an album called Ascension, which was really amazing because they covered the John Coltrane's impossibly difficult song Ascension. And then in 2017, they released Araminta. And then finally in 2018, they released an album called The Terror and the Beauty. And a couple of these records, like Prototype, it's just the power trio. On several of the other albums, they augment with a trumpet player or a saxophone player. And so it becomes real jazz. But the sheer volume and power of the band is exceptional. And adding traditional jazz elements like trumpet and jazz adds to and confirms that they're a jazz band. But for all practical purposes, they're so heavy and they're so loud and they're so powerful, and it's all centered around a powerful rhythm section and an outrageously great guitar player. That it's something that a lot of rock fans would enjoy. So Harriet Tubman, they've got 5 albums out now, and they are as adventurous as they get. And as I mentioned, Brandon Ross gets a lot more sounds across the spectrum than a normal rock guitarist would get, but they're astonishing. And so I'm going to post a bunch below. If you're intrigued, check them out. But definitely a jazz power trio that most rock fans should enjoy. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching I Hate Rock Music.